I've been a full-time landscape photographer for over a decade and only use 4 pieces of photography gear. In today's video, I'll cover the best way to optimize and simplify your gear for landscape photography. You'll learn why less gear equals better photos, the best camera and tripod for landscape photography, the only 2 lenses you'll ever need, common tripod mistakes that ruin your photos, plus tons of other unusual techniques I've created over the past 10 years. Let's dive in and get started. So let's first start with the camera that I carry for landscape photography. So I carry everything in this small, very lightweight ICU. It's just a cube that carries all my gear. I'll go through it here in a moment, but I'm just going to unpack it and we'll go through every piece of equipment that I have inside of it. So you can see my camera gear is very minimal. 2 lenses, which I'll cover, camera body, and some batteries and some extra tools and stuff to go with the tripod. So I use this for backpacking, doing really long backpacking trips, 10 to 15 days out in the wilderness. And I also have a lighter weight camera body setup that's not as high of a quality, but it gets my camera gear down to about 2.5 pounds total, where for my full frame camera, which I'll talk about now, the whole setup with my tripod's about 7 pounds total. So when I want to go really light, I'll use a crop sensor camera for really long trips. But let's go through my favorite camera of all time first. This is the Nikon Z7. It's a full frame camera. It's huge megapixel count. What's really nice about having a really large megapixel count camera is you can carry a wide angle lens like this. This is the 14 to 30. And then you can carry a telephoto lens like this. This is the 24 to 200. Now I used to carry a 300 millimeter lens, but instead of carrying that really heavy, large 300 millimeter lens, what I can do is I can shoot at 200 millimeters and then I can crop into 300 because this is like 8,000 pixels wide on the horizontal. So even if you crop in from 200 to 300, you still have like 6,000 pixels-ish wide, which is a massive file size. So what I really like about the Z7 is, number one, that huge megapixel count. Number two, the dynamic range is massive. You can go on the website, it's DxO Mark, and you can look up dynamic range for different cameras. This is the range between, if you expose to the right, the darkest pixel it'll capture and the brightest pixel it'll capture. So it's the range of the entire histogram that you can capture with one single shot. And what I find with the Z7 is that if I expose to the right as bright as possible without clipping any pixels, then I never have the need to take multiple exposures for dynamic range. I can just double process the same file for the highlights and for the dark. So I've never run into trouble. Even shooting directly into the sun with this camera, it's unbelievable, the dynamic range. So those are the 2 things I'm aiming for with a full frame camera: the dynamic range and the megapixel size, so I don't have to carry this huge set of lenses. So what I like to do for this lens, or for this camera I should say, is I do a few modifications. Number one is take your big bulky camera strap off and just get a 2 millimeter thin Dyneema cord. You can get these on Amazon. They're really lightweight, hard cords, and they're really tough, and you can just tie it on there. So that will save you like 5 or 6 ounces of bulkiness in your kit. The goal is to get your whole camera thing set up down into a very small cube so you never have to worry about it. I only carry 2 lenses in the camera body, and I'm always just grabbing this cube on a trip. I'm never picking which lenses I want. I'm never picking which body that I want. I'm always just having my go-to, and it's set up for any scenario I need. So that's what I really like about this camera body. The next thing I do to modify the camera body is put an L bracket on. I'll show you how the L bracket works. So you have your tripod, which I'll cover my tripod gear here in a second. But the nice thing about the L bracket is it's this little metal clip that goes on both sides of the camera. So when you set it up vertically, you set it directly over the tripod like this. Why this is so nice is because you don't have to bend your tripod to some weird angle down to the side. And the center of gravity of the camera is directly over the tripod, so you're never going to have your tripod tilting. It's way more sturdy. I'll cover some specifics for looking for a tripod here in a moment. But the L bracket's essential because when I want to switch compositions, I can just unclip it and clip it. So there's my horizontal. And to go to vertical, it takes less than a second. There's my vertical. Way more sturdy. It's going to give you way sharper photos. So this is a 3-legged thing, L bracket. They're very cheap. They're like $80, and you just screw it onto your camera. The other thing about the little clips that go on the bottom that's not an L bracket that a lot of people use is they'll come loose. Whereas this, you want to screw it in, and you can use some Loctite. It's just something for screws so they don't unwind themselves. you can put some temporary Loctite in there. That means the ones that you can unscrew. And then you want to put that in there and screw it down and then leave it in a warm room inside your house for 24 hours. And then you're never going to get a wiggly L bracket out in the field. So that's my camera body setup. Super simple. I use this for every single trip. I love full frame cameras for the dynamic range and the megapixel count, so I don't have to carry as many lenses. So now let's get into the lenses. So the lens selection that I use for landscape photography is very simple. I want an extremely wide lens. I use the 14 to 30 f/4 lens. So why I like this lens so much is because it used to be with the older full frame cameras, you really needed an f/2.8 lens. So they're extremely heavy because they have so much glass in them. But now that I find even for shooting low light and night sky stuff, instead of shooting f2.8, I just have this f4 lens and I can just go up a stop in ISO. And since the cameras are so good now, I don't notice hardly any difference in image noise. So there's no reason to lug around this huge, heavy, and plus expensive f2.8 lens. Just get in the 14 millimeter range. You can go with 16 millimeters if you want, but you'll be surprised at how much wider 14 millimeters is for landscape photography. Especially if you're getting close to something like shooting streams or wildflowers or something like that. That extra 14 versus 16 really helps a lot. And this goes up to 30 millimeters. I just want this top range to cover beyond the bottom range or very close to it of my telephoto lens. So the telephoto's 24 to 200 and this is 14 to 30. So there's some overlap. But even if they were close, if you didn't have perfect overlap, it's completely fine to miss a few millimeters. So on every single one of my lenses, I just have a circular polarizer, and this is just a screw-on circular polarizer. All you do when you use this is you use live view on the back. I use live view for every single shot I take because it gives you instantaneous view of the settings you're applying and the exposure. All you do is turn on live view and you turn the circular polarizer until the color and light looks the best. There's no right or wrong. It also protects the front of your lens. So you don't need any special UV filters. I don't even find myself to need an ND filter, which lets you take longer exposures. All I do when I want a longer exposure is I'll just go very low ISO, very high f-stop, just for the part of the image that I want to get that longer exposure, and then I'll blend it into the base image. Because when you're shooting a high f-stop like f22, you're going to get that longer shutter speed, but it's really going to degrade the rest of your image quality. So I'm not using that for the whole shot, but I'll just target one specific part. So circular polarizer, I leave this on at all times except for twilight and night sky. So anytime the sun's above the horizon or during sunrise and sunset, I have a circular polarizer on. So I'm always leaving that on. It's very small. It's just a screw on. This is a Tiffin circular polarizer. I'll leave links for all this stuff below. So that's my wide angle, and it goes with the Z7. And then the other thing I have is the Telephoto 24 to 200. This is a really nice lens. It's very cheap compared to the older Nikon lenses I used. It was the 28 to 300, and this is much sharper than the older lenses. The Z lenses are great. So this has a circular polarizer on it, just as well. And it goes from 24, so about the middle of a scene. So if you're stepping up to a scene and you weren't going to shoot super wide or super telephoto, 24 works. But usually I'm using this to shoot from 70 to about 200 because this covers to 30. And I'm not going to switch from my wide angle to this just to get that 24 to 30. I'll just shoot this for anything 70 to 200-ish. And if I want anything less, I'll just crop on my wide angle lens. The really nice thing about having just two lenses is you're never thinking about what lens you should be to shoot. You're either shooting wide or you're shooting telephoto. There's not any guesswork. You're not having to pick all these different lenses when you go out on trips. And the other big part about owning two lenses, it's super light in your pack. But number two is when you get a new lens, there's optimal places to focus. It's called hyperfocal distance. But you're going to learn how a lens works for perfect focus. And you'll learn what it looks like on the back of your camera when you have perfect focus with your lens. And when you have a bunch of different lenses you have to learn, it's really hard to remember how to use all those lenses optimally. When you only have two lenses, you become an expert at them in the first month of owning them. And then there's no reason to get new lenses for 10, 20, 30 years, so long as you're keeping the same camera system, because glass is not going to improve that much. This glass is fantastic. So you pay up front and then you have it for a long, long time. So two lenses, 14 to 30 f/4, and then 24 to 200 f/4 to f/6.3. So I never get the f2.8 lenses anymore. I want to make sure they go f4 max on the wide angle, and then the telephoto can be f4 at the widest. And then even if it's up at like 6.3 at 200 millimeters, I'm not shooting people. So I don't care if it's f6.3 for a long landscape, because if I'm zoomed in at like 200, I'm usually shooting at like f11 or f16 anyway, because there's such compression in the landscape at that much zoom, because the lens magnifying the whole scene so much. So that's my setup for lenses. Keeps it super easy, super light. I become an expert at those lenses in the first month of using them. I'm never looking for the latest and greatest best new camera bodies or best new lenses. I get the best to start with. I make sure I become an expert at using them, so my hands are moving across the camera and the lenses without even thinking. It's all in the subconscious after I've used it for a month. And then I use that for 10, 15 years. My D810 that I had last, I used that for like 8 years before I got so beat up and I needed a lighter setup for backpacking. That's why I switched. So let's move on to the next part, which is camera batteries and the tools that I have in here, and then this camera bag. So the next important thing to cover is something most people don't do, and this is really going to help you out with your camera gear setup. Number one, you don't need to carry very much stuff with you in your camera bag. It's going to fit in this little ICU. All I have here is this large heavy-duty Ziploc. This is just a quart Ziploc. The first thing that I have in it is just a little bag, Ziploc bag. All this has is a few extra memory cards. I carry 2 extra memory cards in case one fails, basically, because I don't know if it's going to fail. It's never failed on me, but it's good to have one backup memory card. And then 2 small Allen wrenches or hex wrenches. And they are going to be for my tripod and for my L bracket. I use that Loctite on my L bracket, but just in case I need to screw it down. And then for the legs on my tripod, if I'm out on a long backpacking trip and one gets loose, I want to be able to adjust that. That's all the tools that I have. So memory card and 2 of those hex wrenches. The next thing I have are lens wipes. I just carry 1 lens wipe on most trips. If I'm going to be in rain or shooting waterfalls or forests and streams, I'll carry 2 lens wipes. I want them to be big, so don't carry these really small lens wipes. Get some big square or rectangle microfiber lens wipes. Any tech wipes will work. And then every trip, after you use these, you want to wash them so they don't have any dirt or grease on them. And then you just keep them in a Ziploc bag so they stay dry and clean. So carry 2 if you're going to be out shooting in the water or it's going to be wet. The next thing is very helpful. I have my charged batteries. I carry 3 batteries out with me on each trip, and then I have a USB charger, just one of those 10,000 mAh battery bricks that I can charge with, plugged right into my camera. So each of these batteries, I number them with a Sharpie. So I have battery 1, 2, and then I'm filming with 1, so battery 3. So whenever you're using your batteries, if you want to extend the battery life, charge them all fully after each trip, and then start the trip with 1, then go into battery 2, and then go into battery 3. And then you're always going to know which battery you're on, because you're going to pull one out, it's going to be numbered, you're going to go to the step next one up. And then the other thing you can have in your battery bag is a small Ziploc for dead batteries. So after your batteries die, instead of putting them back together with the batteries with charge, just put them in the dead battery bag. And then when you get to camper night or back to your car, you know which batteries to charge, and you know which batteries you have not used yet. So all that fits in this quart Ziploc. And then this is very small, like that. And that can just fit right into my ICU. So we'll cover this ICU setup next and how I like to use it for landscape photography. You don't need one of these big, heavy backpacks for your camera gear. I just use a standard Hyperlight Mountain Gear backpacking backpack. And I can put this ICU at the top of that backpack, and it's always easy access. Then I always have my camera gear with me, and I always have my backpack separate. These are also completely waterproof Dyneema. They're kind of expensive, but they last forever, and they're extremely tough, and they have a lot of volume. So one thing to keep in mind for your ICU setup, this was like 20 bucks on Amazon. It's only 4 ounces. So I used to use the f-stop ICUs, but they're like 10 ounces. I'm trying to get my weight as low as possible because it's nice for hiking. It's nice for backpacking. So with only 2 lenses, the thing to look for here is you have these 2 compartments which you can adjust. My goal is to have, no matter what lens I have on, it can fit in this compartment with the camera body. So usually I'll just store it, telephoto lens right here. And then I'll have my batteries and that bag I just talked about over the telephoto. And then right here, I'll put the wide angle lens. Now, the nice thing about this setup is I could switch the telephoto lens right here and put the wide angle here, and it'll still completely fit in this kit. The goal is to not have to take or switch lenses just to fit it in your ICU. If you can fit them both in your ICU no matter what, then if it's raining or something, you don't have to take your lens off just to put your camera back in the ICU. So this is just a zipper top. And on the top of this, I tied another little Dyneema cord, so when it's really windy, I'll hang this under my tripod on the little clip, and that'll help with some shake when I'm shooting in really windy conditions or I'm shooting in water like forests and streams if my tripod legs are in the water. So that's going to help a lot. You can also put a rock or something heavy in this because your camera's going to be on the tripod, so it won't have much weight. So you can just toss a rock in it and then hang it off the bottom. And that's really going to be useful for keeping your images sharp. So now let's cover tripods for landscape photography. This is maybe the biggest mistake people make. They get a really nice full frame camera, some good glass or lenses, and then they don't get a nice tripod. They might get a carbon fiber tripod, but oftentimes they'll get these massive tripods with these huge ball heads and lots of adjustments on the ball head, and it just makes their life overly complicated. So let's first go through the things that I look for in a tripod. Number one is I use this Really Right Stuff BH25 ball head. Why I like it? A few different reasons. Number one, to turn or to move the camera on and off, instead of a knob that you screw, it's just a lever. So you're not screwing and unscrewing your knob every time. You're just putting your L bracket right here and clicking the lever and your camera's down. You want to remove things that are going to take you extra seconds in the field because they add up when you're shooting a lot. So that's the first thing. You want to have a very stable base, but the ball head doesn't have to be huge. The other thing that I'm looking for here with the ball head, let me get my camera out, is that I want there to only be one knob for adjustments. So, number one, when I clip this, it's clipped already. When I'm looking at the setup for how I'm holding the camera, once I have it set up and stable on the tripod and everything's level, I only want one knob for the camera adjustments. You can see it with the ball head, all maneuvers can be made just by loosening this knob, and then I can tighten it where I want. When you have multiple knobs, you're not going to know what to do because you're going to be like, should I adjust this knob? Should I adjust this knob? You have full flexibility with just this one knob. So my goal is to keep my right hand on the camera when I'm selecting my composition, and my left hand just unscrews the knob. I find the composition I want, and then I screw the knob, and I'm done. And it stays sturdy. You'll see I have this third knob here. I lock that in all the way. That's just going to allow me to spin the tripod, which I never do. I'm always just setting the tripod up in the direction that I want to shoot. These back two legs are splitting me right in the chest, and this front leg is going forward, and I just keep one of these pads, so I know that's always going to be my left. So when I set the tripod up, putting my camera on, I'm clicking it on, adjusting my composition with my right hand, locking it down with this hand. It should not be complicated. No twisting, no turning, no adjusting multiple knobs. That's going to really make you have a lot of extra time to dial in your compositions and concentrate on the color and light in the scene, which is really all that matters in the long run. So that's the first thing. Other things that we're going to look at. These are very important as well. Notice that this tripod, which is a little dirty, only has two extensions on the leg. So there's two twists right here. A lot of tripods will have like 5 different twist knobs. Every time you want to take up or set down the tripod, you have to twist all of the knobs open, and then you have to twist all the knobs shut. And I'm sure you've had this happen. Sometimes you'll set your tripod down and one leg will start going down because you didn't twist these all the way. Well, then you have to check all 5 of them. With 2, you know it's one or the other. So it's very easy to lock in, lock out. 2 max. This is still a full height tripod. So if I stood up with this, it's still going up to right under my chin, which is plenty. I have another smaller tripod that also only has 2 of these adjusters that I use for really long backpacking trips. But if you're not doing backpacking, this is the Faisal Tournament. It's my favorite tripod if you want to have a really sturdy, lightweight tripod. It's pretty small for what it does. And with this ball head, it's extremely sturdy. So if you're not doing a lot of really long backpacking trips, if you're just doing day hikes or 2 to 3 night backpacking trips,
and you want a really sturdy tripod, which is going to be important for telephoto shots when you're zoomed in, or if it's very windy out, or if your tripod is down touching water or something moving like oceans, forests, and streams, anything else like that. This is my favorite tripod of all time. The other thing to look for with tripod adjustments is these levers that allow you to get down low. You want them to be very simple. So these just click. If I wanted to make my tripod leg wider, I just click it, bring it up a notch, click it, bring it up a notch. There's nothing fancy. You don't want anything that's going to have seemingly good benefits from being overly complex. Everything should be one click, one turn, one clip, and you're done. So make your tripod as simple as possible. I recommend this to everybody. Everybody that comes to my workshops and has shot with this or brings one because I recommended it, they absolutely love this setup. So I'll leave links for that down below. So that covers the tripod setup. And then this all fits in my backpacking bag. I just put the tripod in the outside pockets, and then I put this ICU inside, unless I'm shooting on the trail. Then I'll just put my camera body on one of the outside parts of this pack. So next, let's cover the camera backpack that I use. This is the Ultralight Mountain Gear North Rim 55. And it's a huge pack. You can see these are made so they're just like a roll stop stuff sack. Just a huge internal compartment. It's got a pocket on this side, a pocket on this side, and a pocket in the back. So when I'm hiking with this, I am never getting into the middle of it during the day. Keeping my water and my tripod on the sides, my camera body with one lens, usually the wide angle, in this back, and my food in the back. And then I don't have to dig in and out of my pack all day while I'm hiking. And then I'll keep this ICU on the inside of the pack with my telephoto lens and the tools because I don't need to access them. So a battery will easily last me a day. So I prefer these Ultralight mountain gear backpacks way more than a camera gear backpack. Those backpacks are just complicated. They're heavy. They have way too many compartments to hold your cameras and lenses. I also prefer these more than like the Duda or Osprey or REI backpacking packs. This is only a 2-pound pack. It's extremely lightweight. It's waterproof. It's extremely durable, made out of Dyneema material. Very simple. It's got these hip belt pockets where you can keep, usually I keep snacks, a pair of gloves if it's cold, and some water purification tablets or something like that. And this is all you need. Simplicity is king for landscape photography. If you have to get in and out of your pack all day to shoot, meaning opening the main compartment or unzipping some main compartment on a camera gear backpack, it's just going to be a pain and it's going to keep you from shooting when the light's really good. So if I'm hiking and there's some fog or light rays, I don't want to be taking 2 minutes to get into the main compartment of my backpack. All I'm doing is grabbing my camera body out of here, grabbing my tripod out of the side, and then one clip, and I'm on. So you can see that was like a 5-second setup for my camera gear. I don't have to constantly be shuffling in and out of my pack. I know everything's there and ready to go. So that is my complete setup for landscape photography. I've been using this for 15 years as a full-time landscape photographer and optimizing it. Of course, I didn't start with this setup, but I've probably been using it for about 5 years straight now with this exact same setup, and it's working really well for me. So the next camera setup I want to talk about is something that I use for longer backpacking trips, meaning 5+ days when I have a lot of food and my pack's getting heavy. I like to keep my pack under 20 pounds total, including all the food for the trip. So everything's ultralight, and that's going to make me have the ability to get a lot more miles and to get into locations that most people will never have the chance to shoot from. And that's what I really like to do, is get into really hard to reach mountain locations or desert locations or ocean locations. And sometimes I have to sacrifice with camera weight, but it's completely fine because I've recently started using this Nikon Z30. Now this is a crop sensor camera, and I only carry one lens on it. This is the Nikon 16-50. So it's not going to give me as much variety as shooting with the wide angle lenses and the telephoto lenses I just went over. And then I have a smaller tripod to go with it. So of course there's some downgrades when I'm shooting with this. I don't have the L bracket on it because it saves weight not to have it. This camera does not have a viewfinder eyepiece, which I don't find to be a problem because I shoot in live view. And when I'm carrying this full setup, I don't carry that ICU that carries it either. I just leave it on the tripod and I just tuck it on the tripod right in this back pouch. So this full setup is 2.5 pounds, including all my batteries and my lens wipes and everything else, whereas that's like 7.5. So that's multiple days of food. It's going to keep my pack a lot lighter. I also use this for making video. I was just shooting a video on it just now. So this is something I've added into my kit because when I used to do really long trips, say 5 to 10 day backpacking trips, I would actually just leave my camera gear at home because it's hard to carry that much food and get into some really good locations and carry camera gear that's heavy. So I would just use those trips as scouting trips, and I would save locations to come back to at a later time. But now I actually just take this because it's like the same weight as an extra day of food on my trip. So it's going to make my pack really light. So of course there's a trade-off, but I've been using this camera a lot lately. The dynamic range is not quite as good, but it's surprisingly good for a crop sensor camera. I'm very surprised. The noise at very low dynamic range scenes, like if you're shooting right into the sun and then you have a dark area, there's very small amounts of noise in the images. Compared to the Z7, there's no noise. But even if I push the ISO up on this camera, like 400 or 600, shooting directly in the sun with some dark areas, or shooting in twilight or low light, I can see some noise when I'm zoomed in at 100% on the computer. But when I'm sharpening these for my portfolio online, I can't see the noise at all. So I actually don't think there's too much of a downgrade shooting with a camera like this. I prefer the Z7 and the wide angle and telephoto lenses. It just gives me way better outcomes for the checking or picking different focal lengths. But if I want to go light, I really don't see much downsides in this. It's better than not having a camera at all. I also like that I can fit this small body right in my hip belt, one of these little pockets right here on the side of my pack. And then if I'm hiking with my friends, I can take action shots of them hiking up in the mountains on the trail or whatever else. And I put all those images in my behind the scenes portfolio, which I really like to add to as well. So of course there's some downsides with this, but this tripod is very similar to that other one. This is an Asiac backcountry hunting tripod. So it's supposed to be used for glass for backcountry hunting. This total tripod is 20 ounces for the setup. That one I just showed you guys is 60 ounces for the setup. So it's a third lighter. This one only has 3 legs, so only 2 different adjustments as well. A lot of these travel tripods that you'll see will have very skinny legs at the bottom. That's why I like this one so much, because even the bottom leg isn't that skinny. And it's plenty high, if I put this down on the ground, that my other one comes up to here, this comes up to here. I never find myself really using that top length of the tripod. Once in a while, it's nice, but I've never run into a circumstance where I can't capture the composition I want using this tripod. So I'll often mix this tripod with my Z7 in the full setup for shorter trips, say 3, 4, 5 days. And then if I'm doing the really long trips where I'm trying to do big miles, like 20 to 30 miles a day, 6 to 10,000 feet of elevation gain, get into some places, maybe 140 or 50 miles over a 6 or 7 or 10 day trip, then I'm carrying this small setup. And I've never come into a circumstance where I'm like, man, I couldn't have got this shot. Now, of course, I'll have to pick some different compositions because of the lens setup, but I don't find that to be a problem. So on this lens, I also have the circular polarizer. And you can see, even with the lens out, it's a very, very small camera. I could put the L bracket on here, but I just wanted to save the extra 4 ounces so I could have that super lightweight setup. So if you're doing a lot of backpacking and you want to get into some serious places, I would still go with the Z7 and just carry some more weight and make a longer trip if you're only doing like 2 to 3 backpacking trips a year. But I'm hiking 2,000 to 3,000 miles a year into places that are really hard to get to, really exposed terrain. So I'd need that light pack. So you'd have to make this trade-off, right? It depends how into backpacking you are and how big of miles you want to do. If you only want to do like a 10 or 15 mile day every day, the Z7 is going to work well for you in any trip. But you might want to add this Asiac backcountry tripod and save the 40 ounces compared to that Faisal one. If you're just doing day hikes, the Faisal one's great. So that's a full overview of all the gear I carry. Hopefully it helps you guys out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.